She marched up with a clipboard, barking orders like she ran the place, told him to pack up and leave, claimed he was trespassing. What she didn't know, the man she dismissed so casually owned the entire lake and her little fishing club. It was only there because he allowed it. This is the story of what happens when entitlement meets quiet power, and dignity speaks louder than anger. The sun hadn't fully cracked over the tree line when Clarence Rucker backed his old Chevy into the gravel lot at Mayfield Lake. The morning mist still danced along the glassy water, and the only sounds were birdsong and the slow creak of his trailer hitch. He moved with quiet intention, boots scuffing softly, coffee steaming in his thermos, a silver fishing rod already leaning against the truck bed. This lake wasn't just a favorite spot. It was memory, legacy, peace. He was halfway through unfastening the boat straps when he heard it. Quick, purposeful footsteps on gravel. He turned just in time to see her. Mid-50s, short blonde hair, sunglasses already perched on her head, despite the early hour. Clipboard clutched like a badge, and a voice that didn't ask questions. It delivered orders. "You can't park that here," she said sharply. Before he even had a chance to say good morning, Clarence straightened. "Beg your pardon? This lot is private. For Mayfield Hills community members only. You need to move your boat." There was no courtesy in her tone, just the weight of assumed authority. Clarence gave a slow nod, resting his hand on the trailer crank. "Didn't see a sign." "There's one near the pavilion," she snapped. "You must have missed it." Clarence didn't reply right away. He looked past her, out at the still lake. Not another soul in sight. "I've fished here plenty of times," he said evenly. "Never had a problem." "Well," she said with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've got one now. Either you move your boat, or I'll call this in." She stepped closer, tapping her pen against the clipboard like a countdown. "What's your name?" "Clarence Rucker." She scribbled without asking permission. "And do you live in Mayfield Hills?" "No, ma'am." "Then you're not permitted. The lake is restricted to the fishing club, and their invited guests. We've had issues with people, trash, broken benches. This area is for residents. Under supervision." Clarence looked at her, really looked. The tight mouth, the squint that said she didn't recognize him, but had already judged him. The word people hung in the air like fog. She didn't have to say what she meant. He heard it anyway. "I'm not breaking anything," he said. "Just trying to enjoy the water. You need to leave. Now." There was a pause. A long one. Clarence exhaled, not from anger, but restraint. "You sure you want to push this?" he asked quietly. She blinked. "Excuse me." Clarence took one slow step toward the trailer, eyes never leaving hers. "I think you're mistaken," he said. "About who owns this lake." She actually laughed. Short, sharp, dismissive. "Is that supposed to intimidate me? Do you know how long I've lived here?" Clarence didn't flinch. "Do you know who bought this lake 3 years ago?" Her pen stopped, just for a second. The shift was small, but he saw it, and he knew right then. This wasn't about rules. It was about control, and she had just challenged the wrong man. Teresa Holcomb planted her feet, like she was settling in for a courtroom cross-examination. Clipboard tucked tight against her chest. She adjusted her sunglasses with one hand, and pointed her pen with the other. "I'm on the HOA board," she said, like it carried the weight of a sheriff's star. "And I've never seen your name on the list of approved lake users." Clarence didn't move, didn't raise his voice. Just blinked once, slowly. "Didn't know I needed approval to enjoy the morning." Her lips thinned. "This area is under the care of the Mayfield Hills Homeowners Association. The fishing club has exclusive access. No outside boats, no public use. You're trespassing, Mr. Rucker." Clarence looked past her, out toward the rippling edge of the lake. Mist was lifting off the water like breath, and somewhere near the far shoreline, a bird cut low across the reeds. The quiet was beautiful, peaceful, or it had been before she brought noise. "I don't recall seeing any gates," he said, "or fences, or guards. There are signs. You missed them." "Maybe." Teresa stepped closer. "Too close." "Is that boat registered to you?" He met her eyes. "It is." "Well, then you'll have no issue giving me your information. Full name, address. The board will be following up." Clarence reached for his thermos instead, unscrewing the cap slowly, letting the steam curl into the morning air. "Tell me something, Miss Holcomb. You walk up to every man at this lake with a clipboard and a threat." She stiffened. When someone's breaking rules, yes. It's my job to protect the community. Clarence sipped his coffee. Calm, measured. And who gave you permission to assume I didn't belong? Her jaw clenched. He went on. You didn't ask why I'm here. Didn't ask my connection to this place. You just decided, on sight.
I'm following policy, she said tightly.
No, Clarence replied, setting the thermos down on the trailer. You're following assumptions. There's a difference. Teresa's pen tapped against the metal clip. Fast now. Nervous, maybe. But she didn't back off. Look, I'm sure you mean well, but you're clearly not familiar with how things work around here. So I'm telling you, for your own sake, pack up and go. Clarence let out a quiet breath. Not a sigh. A warning. You might want to double-check your information, he said softly, before you go calling in favors or waving clipboards around. Is that a threat? No, ma'am, he said, eyes steady. That's advice. She scoffed again, backing away. You'll be hearing from the board. Clarence turned back to the hitch, calmly securing the last strap. She thought she was dealing with a stranger. She didn't realize she'd just poked a man with the title to her lake in his filing cabinet. Teresa squinted at him, like she was trying to figure out if he was joking, or just slow. So what you expect me to believe you own this lake? She said, voice rising with theatrical disbelief. That's rich. Clarence didn't react, didn't even blink, just stood there next to his old boat, steady as the gravel under his boots. The early sun had begun to stretch across the water, lighting it gold, but Teresa couldn't see it. She was too busy trying to win a fight she didn't understand. Let me guess, she went on, waving her clipboard like a sword. Some long-lost cousin left it to you in a will. Or maybe you found a magic deed behind a cereal box. Still, he said nothing. His silence didn't come from uncertainty. It came from knowing he didn't have to prove a thing. That only made her angrier. Oh, come on, she snapped. You're seriously trying to tell me that this land, this lake, belongs to you? You think I haven't lived here long enough to know who owns what? Clarence took one step toward the tailgate, leaned back against it. Calm, quiet, letting her noise hang in the air like smoke. You're welcome to check public records, he said evenly. Greene County Recorder's Office. Name spelled just like it sounds. Teresa gave a sharp fake laugh. Oh, I will. Trust me. And when I do, you'll wish you hadn't played games with me this morning. You don't get to walk in here like you're above the rules. I didn't walk in, he said quietly. I backed in, with a boat. She stopped short, lips twitching at the corner, like she wanted to snap again but couldn't find the next line. Then she pointed the clipboard directly at him. You've got 5 minutes to get that trailer hitched and off this lot. I'm calling HOA security. Clarence nodded slowly. You do what you think is best. I already did, she shot back. I came down here to deal with this myself, but apparently you need to be handled. She turned sharply on her heel, stomping back across the gravel, with the clipped pace of someone who thought retreat was still a kind of victory. Her voice carried as she pulled out her phone. Yeah, it's Teresa. I need someone down at the lake access point right now. Clarence watched her go. Didn't speak, didn't stop her. He just looked out at the lake, his lake, and let her words blow past like wind over the surface. She hadn't asked who he was. Hadn't asked what the lake meant to him. She didn't know it yet, but that name she wrote down. It was the name on the deed, the name that didn't flinch. The water was calm again, whispering against the shore like nothing had happened. Clarence sat in the middle of it all, alone in his boat, rod in hand, the slow drift of current carrying him just enough to feel alive. He wasn't fishing so much as remembering, the kind of peace you didn't find in words or noise, just stillness. Then came the whine of small tires on gravel. He didn't have to look to know who it was. A white golf cart rolled up to the dock, tires crunching over the same path. Teresa had marched down earlier. She was back, sunglasses still on, but now flanked by backup. A man in a navy windbreaker, with a walkie clipped to his chest, sat beside her, maybe late 20s, clean-shaven, too young to hide his discomfort. They stopped at the edge of the dock. Teresa stood like she was presiding over a trial, feet planted, chin high, voice louder than necessary. Clarence Rucker, she shouted. This is your final warning. You're in violation of HOA regulations. You are to leave the premises immediately. Clarence didn't move, He reeled in his line with a slow, lazy motion. No rush. Just patience. "Morning again, Teresa," he called back, calm as ever. The young security officer leaned toward her, whispered something. She cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. Clarence folded his hands over his lap. "That man with you," he called out. "He got a badge, or just a walkie?" The officer straightened. "Sir, may I ask what your business is on the lake today?" "You can ask. And are you a resident of Mayfield Hills?" "I'm not." "Then I'm going to have to ask you to come ashore." Clarence shifted slightly in his seat, looked up at the sky. Then casually, like it was just another part of the breeze, he said, "You ever hear of Crescent Holdings?" The officer blinked. "Can't say I have." "Figures," Clarence said. "It's a private trust. Bought this land and the lake 3 years ago. I'm the sole trustee." Teresa scoffed. "Oh please." He didn't respond to her, just kept his eyes on the young man. "All public record. You can look it up at the Greene County Recorder's Office. Titles clear, deeds filed, and access. It was granted to the HOA on a conditional basis. You're overdue on renewal." The guard looked at Teresa. She didn't look back. "I'll show identification," Clarence added. "When the deputy arrives." "That's who you called, right?" Teresa's face flushed. "You're making a scene." Clarence leaned back in his chair. "No, ma'am. You came to me. Again." The wind shifted, ruffling the water around his boat. The silence afterward said more than either of them could, because for the first time, she wasn't sure she was in charge. And he hadn't moved an inch. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as Clarence pulled back into his driveway. Jasper barked once from the porch, tail thumping against the step like he'd been waiting all morning. Clarence gave a nod, but didn't speak. He was still thinking about her face when he mentioned Crescent Holdings. The flicker of doubt she tried to hide behind her clipboard. Inside, the house was cool and quiet. He kicked off his boots, hung his keys on the same hook he'd used for a decade, and walked straight down the hall to the filing cabinet. Bottom drawer, left side. A blue folder labeled Mayfield Lake in faded black ink. He laid it flat on the dining table, and opened it like a preacher opening scripture. First page. Deed transfer. Stamped and notarized. The lake, the dock, the surrounding greenbelt, legally transferred to Crescent Holdings. Third page. Trustee assignment, listing Clarence Rucker as the sole executor of that trust. His name, his signature, his authority. He flipped further, stopping at the access agreement. Dated 3 years back. An arrangement signed between the HOA and his father's estate. Conditional use of the lake by the Mayfield Hills Fishing Club. Terms clearly outlined, maintenance responsibilities, behavior expectations, and most importantly, annual renewal required. Clarence traced the clause with his finger. The last signed renewal, dated 10 months ago. No follow-up, no contact. They'd just assumed. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling through his nose. It wasn't anger bubbling up. It was the steady weight of recognition. They didn't forget to renew. They just figured he'd stay quiet, like always. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the word trespasser hadn't just come from nowhere. It came from something deeper. The assumption that people like him needed permission. That if he showed up unannounced, he must be out of place. Clarence stood, walked to the shelf by the door, and picked up the photo of him and his father, barefoot by the lake, a fish gripped in one hand, a joy too big for the frame in the other. Back then, no one questioned who they were. The land, the water, the mornings, they belonged to anyone who respected them. But respect, he was learning, didn't always come back the way it was given. He turned back to the table, stared at the folder. Teresa Holcomb had come at him loud, proud, clipboard first, called the security guy, threatened to call the sheriff. All without ever asking a single honest question. Clarence reached for his phone, scrolled down to a contact he hadn't called in a while. "Hey Mr. Lang," he said when the line picked up. "Yeah, it's been a minute. Listen, I need you to pull up the HOA access file from 3 years ago. Just want to double-check something on the fishing clause." He paused, staring back at the folder, because it's time folks remembered whose lake they've been enjoying. The folder still sat open on the table, but Clarence wasn't looking at it anymore. His eyes were fixed on the photo beside it, faded at the corners, bent from too many years in the same frame. His father stood barefoot at the edge of the lake, shirt half tucked, fish in one hand, the other resting on Clarence's 10-year-old shoulder. No clipboard, no regulations. Just joy and morning mist. That was how it used to be. Clarence could still hear his father's voice, slow and steady like gravel over water. You don't own land, son. You take care of it. And if you do it right, it takes care of you. Back then, he didn't understand what that meant. Not really. But now, with that blue folder spread open, and the memory of Teresa's voice still fresh in his ears, it rang clearer than ever. His father hadn't been rich. Just proud. A man who believed in two things: hard work and shared spaces. He'd struck the original deal with the Mayfield Hills developers. Let the community fish, swim, wander, so long as they respected the land. No written contract at first, just a handshake and trust. But after his death, everything changed. People stopped waving, stopped looking him in the eye. The invitations dried up. The HOA board, once friendly and deferential to his father, had grown tight-lipped when Clarence took over as trustee. No meetings, no discussions, just quiet usage, like the lake had become theirs by muscle memory. Clarence hadn't pushed back. Not at first. He thought giving space was the respectful thing to do. But now, with Teresa's voice ringing in his memory, "You're trespassing," he realized what had really happened. They hadn't just forgotten who his father was. They'd decided none of it mattered anymore. He picked up the trustee document again, his name written neatly beneath the words sole authority. It wasn't about power. It never had been. It was about responsibility, about keeping something sacred safe. And if that meant dealing with noise and clipboards and security guards, so be it. Because that lake, it wasn't a luxury. It was inheritance. Not the kind you spend. The kind you protect. Clarence stood and walked to the window. The trees swayed in the early afternoon wind, casting long shadows over the grass. Somewhere beyond them, the water shimmered like memory. He didn't want to fight. Never did. But if protecting that legacy meant reminding people where the line was drawn, then he'd do it. Quietly, firmly, just like his father taught him. Clarence stepped into the Greene County Recorder's office just after 9 a.m. The kind of place that smelled like laminate and old air conditioning. A woman at the front desk greeted him with a polite smile, but didn't ask his name, just pointed him toward the computer terminals with a flick of her wrist. He didn't mind. This wasn't about being seen. It was about getting the truth on record. He moved slow, deliberate, searched by parcel number first, then by trust name. Within minutes, the screen filled with exactly what he expected: his name, his signature, his lake, deed filed, boundaries defined. No shared ownership, no HOA claim. It was all there, clean and quiet in black and white. The clerk came over and glanced at the monitor. "Looks like everything's in order, Mr. Rucker." He nodded, just wanted to be sure. On the way home, he didn't listen to music, just the hum of the road beneath the tires, the weight of certainty settling in his chest. He wasn't looking for revenge. He wasn't angry. He just wanted the line redrawn, clearly this time, so there'd be no more assumptions. At his dining table, he opened his laptop and pulled up a blank document. The words came steady, each sentence carefully measured. No caps lock, no bold, no emotion. To the Mayfield Hills Homeowners Association, this letter serves as formal notice that the community's access agreement to Mayfield Lake, held under Crescent Holdings Trust, has expired and is no longer valid. No renewal was filed within the required time frame, and as such, access is hereby suspended until further review and renegotiation. He attached copies of the original deed, the trustee appointment, and the expired access agreement. No commentary, just proof. When he finished, he printed the packet, placed it in a thick manila envelope, and sealed it with the kind of finality you feel in your bones. Then he drove it down himself. The HOA office sat behind a wrought iron gate near the community center. Beige siding, polished sign out front, perfectly trimmed bushes. Clarence stepped inside and handed the envelope to a young woman at the front desk. She glanced down at the name and hesitated. "Do you want a receipt or?" Clarence met her eyes. "Just make sure Teresa gets it." He turned and walked out without another word. Back at home, he poured himself a glass of water and sat on the porch. Jasper curled up by his feet. The sun was setting low now, dipping just behind the trees that bordered the lake. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't sent threats, just the truth, delivered plainly, backed by fact. Because if they were going to pretend ownership didn't matter, He'd remind them that legacy doesn't get erased by assumption. It gets reinforced by documentation. By the time Clarence pulled back into his driveway, the envelope was already resting on a polished desk behind the gates of Mayfield Hills. He didn't need to check his watch to know what time the ripple would hit. HOA offices didn't move fast, but gossip did. It started small, a forwarded email, a whispered conversation on a morning dog walk. But by that afternoon, the letter was everywhere. Neighbors passed it around like contraband, screenshots, printed copies, highlighted phrases. Some read it with furrowed brows, others with tight smiles that said finally. At the grocery store, Clarence noticed it in the way people looked at him, longer than usual, like they were trying to figure out what to say. A woman by the produce section nodded at him, then quickly looked away. Two men near the checkout lane whispered behind cupped hands, eyes flicking toward him, then down. Back behind the gates, the HOA board was reeling. Teresa Holcomb, according to one resident, had stormed out of an early morning meeting, red-faced and silent. Another claimed she was drafting a response, though no one saw her typing anything. Ron Castile, the acting president, reportedly read the letter 3 times before setting it down with a sigh, and saying, "Well, hell." No one had expected Clarence to respond. Not like this. Not officially. Not with documents and a legal name stamped on county records. He was supposed to be quiet, easy to ignore, just a guy with an old boat. Now the entire neighborhood was split. Some called it an overreaction, said he was being petty. "It's just a lake," one post read on the Mayfield Hills message board. He didn't have to go nuclear. Others pushed back. Maybe if people treated him with respect, this wouldn't have happened. Another added, "I heard Teresa didn't even let him speak before calling security." Clarence didn't engage, didn't reply. He just stayed off the message boards and focused on his own space. The lake hadn't changed. The birds still sang. The mist still rose in the morning, but the neighborhood, it was buzzing. Someone left an unsigned note in his P.O. box, just a folded piece of paper that read,
"She doesn't speak for all of us."
At the gas station, an older man with oil-stained hands nodded at Clarence.
"You the one who owns the lake?"
Clarence met his gaze. "I am." The man tipped his cap. Good. But not everyone was friendly. By evening, a flyer appeared in his mailbox. No envelope, no signature. Local man revokes community lake access. Retaliation or power grab. Bold letters. Thinly veiled accusation. Clarence read it once, then fed it straight into the kitchen trash. He wasn't interested in arguing. He didn't need them to like him. He just needed them to understand. You don't get to rewrite someone out of their own legacy, and then act surprised when they remind you who it belongs to. The air inside the Mayfield Hills HOA meeting room was thick with tension, and the scent of burnt coffee. Beige walls. Mismatched chairs. A laminated map of the neighborhood curling at the edges on one side. No one was smiling. Teresa Holcomb sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. Her clipboard was there, of course, resting on top of a folder thick with printouts of Clarence's letter. She hadn't said a word since she walked in. Ron Castile broke the silence first, rubbing the bridge of his nose like he was nursing a migraine. "We all read the letter," he muttered. "We know what it says." Don Keeling, one of the older board members, leaned forward. "So what, we just let him shut us out? Treat us like we're trespassers on our own lake?" Teresa's jaw tightened. "We've had access for years. That lake has always been part of this community." Andrea Preston, newer to the board, younger by a couple decades, looked up from her copy of the agreement. "We had conditional access," she said evenly, "and we let it lapse." Don waved a hand. "Because no one told us we had to renew it every year." Andrea pointed at the paragraph with her pen. "It's right here. Signed by the HOA. Annual renewal. Required." Another board member, Carla Jennings, shifted uncomfortably. "Still, revoking access entirely feels like an extreme move." Ron looked toward Teresa. This wouldn't even be happening if someone hadn't gone after him with security. On his property. Teresa snapped up, eyes flashing. "I didn't know who he was. He didn't identify himself." "You didn't ask," Andrea replied quietly. Teresa turned toward her. "Excuse me, you didn't ask," Andrea repeated. "You saw a man with a boat, and decided he didn't belong." For a moment, no one spoke. The hum of the wall-mounted AC unit filled the room. Don tried again. Still, it's not like we meant harm. Maybe if we just explain things. You think he doesn't know? Andrea said. He gave us 3 years of uninterrupted access. Never asked for a dime. Never interfered. And we thanked him by calling him a trespasser. That landed heavier than anyone expected. Ron finally spoke again. We can debate feelings all day. But the reality is, Clarence has every legal right to do what he did. That lake isn't ours. It never was. Teresa looked down at her clipboard, as if it might change the facts on the page. Outside, sprinklers ticked to life across the neatly trimmed lawns of Mayfield Hills. Inside, no one was shouting. But no one was pretending anymore either. Because behind those closed gates, they had built an illusion, and Clarence Rucker had just torn the curtain down. The lake didn't care about the drama. It mirrored the sky the same way it always had. Soft, still, quiet. Clarence stood at the edge of the dock with a clipboard of his own now, the irony not lost on him. But this one wasn't about authority. It was about record-keeping, accountability. He moved slowly, checking each section of the shoreline like a man taking stock of an old family heirloom, one that had been borrowed, used, and returned scratched without apology. The fencing near the trailhead, half-rotted. 3 posts leaned inward like tired old men. Someone had wrapped them in twine instead of replacing them. The benches by the fire pit. One was missing an entire backrest. The other had graffiti carved into the slats. Nothing profane, just initials, and the outline of a heart. Still, it wasn't the kind of care you give to something that isn't yours. Near the reeds, soda cans bobbed half-submerged in the shallows. Fast food wrappers drifted toward the rocks. One of the trash bins had no lid, the liner tied off with a plastic bread clip. Clarence jotted notes quietly. No frustration in his pen strokes. No spite, just facts. This wasn't about perfection. He didn't expect the place to look untouched. Nature invited people to live in it. But what stood out was the indifference. The kind of wear that builds when folks stop feeling responsible, when they assume someone else will clean it up. He stepped over a broken board near the path, and made a note. Maintenance had been part of the original agreement, clear as day, and for 3 years, Clarence hadn't said a word. He'd watched them enjoy the view, throw community events, pass out fishing permits like they had the deed. And now, standing ankle-deep in trampled grass and bottle caps, he saw it clearly. They hadn't just assumed he didn't mind. They'd assumed he didn't matter. Jasper trotted ahead, nose down, tail swinging, oblivious to paperwork and pride. Clarence followed him down to the dock's edge, and stared out across the water. The HOA wanted access, but they hadn't earned stewardship. They hadn't respected the terms. They hadn't even kept up the illusion of partnership. And Teresa, well, Teresa had just said out loud what the rest had only implied. Clarence took one last look at the list in his hands, folded the paper, and tucked it into his back pocket. He wasn't looking to punish anyone, but if silence was mistaken for permission, it was time to speak. Not with threats, with truth. The knock came just after sundown. Soft, hesitant. Clarence looked up from the porch, Jasper's ears perking beside him. A woman stood near the gate. Jeans, sneakers, a folder tucked under her arm. Not one of the regulars. She didn't wave, didn't try to smile too wide. Just waited. Clarence stood and stepped down. "You with the board?" he asked. She nodded. "Andrea Preston. I'm new, voted in after a few resignations." He raised an eyebrow. "That right. I wasn't there when it happened," she said quickly. "Saturday. I heard about it after." Her voice was quiet, careful. "Look, I'm not here to defend anyone. I just wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come to the next meeting. Speak to the residents, in your own words." Clarence studied her. "Why?" "Because they've only heard one version of you," she said. "And it's not the right one." He let that sit in the air for a moment. The wind rustled the trees behind her. Jasper let out a single low bark, like he was echoing the sentiment. "Not looking to stir up more noise," Clarence said finally. "This was never about making a scene." "I know," Andrea said. "But people are talking. Most of them never even knew who owned the lake. They assumed." He gave a dry chuckle. "Assumption's a dangerous thing when mixed with entitlement." She didn't argue. "I'm not coming to take sides," he warned. Not interested in finger-pointing. That's not what we need, Andrea said. We just need clarity. Honesty. Clarence glanced back at the house, then toward the lake just beyond the trees. He thought of his father, of that broken bench, of the flyer in his mailbox. I'll come, he said, but I'm not dressing it up. I'll say what needs saying. Andrea nodded. That's all anyone should ask. He didn't shake her hand, and she didn't offer, but there was something in the quiet that passed between them. Mutual understanding, not yet trust, but something leaning in that direction. After she left, Clarence returned to the porch, sat down slow. Jasper curled back beside him. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in copper streaks. He knew what was waiting at that meeting. The looks, the tension, maybe even another accusation or two. But he wasn't showing up to defend himself. He was showing up because silence had let others write the story for too long, and it was time they heard the version backed by truth. The community room filled faster than anyone expected. Folding chairs scraped across the floor as neighbors squeezed into rows, while others stood along the back wall, arms crossed or tucked tightly to their chests. Even the side doors stayed propped open, people lining the hallway just to listen. Clarence stood off to the side, not behind a podium, not holding notes, just jeans, boots, and a button-up shirt that had seen more sunrises than boardrooms. He didn't scan the crowd. He didn't try to command it. He waited. Ron Castile stepped up first, tapping the mic. Thanks for coming. Tonight's meeting wasn't scheduled, but recent events have made it necessary. Mr. Rucker has agreed to speak. A few murmurs. A cough. Someone shifted in their seat. Clarence walked forward slowly. He didn't clear his throat. Didn't apologize for being there. He just looked out at them all. People who'd lived behind the gates for years, most of whom had never bothered to look him in the eye. My father brought me to that lake when I was 10, he began, voice steady but low. Back before any of these houses existed. Back when the only thing on that shoreline was silence and morning fog. A hush settled over the room. He taught me how to cast a line, how to wait, how to listen. We cooked fish on hot stones by the dock, and left things cleaner than we found them. He paused. 3 years ago, I bought that lake through a trust to honor him. I didn't hang signs. Didn't put up fences. I let the neighborhood keep using it. No fees, no announcements, just expected folks to treat it with care. Some did, some didn't. Someone in the back whispered to their neighbor. Clarence heard it, but didn't flinch. But then one Saturday morning, I got told I didn't belong, told I was trespassing, threatened with security on land I legally own. He let that land softly, but the room stiffened. I wasn't given a chance to speak. I wasn't asked who I was. I was judged, assumed, and not because of a rule, but because of how someone decided I should look or act to be worthy of space. A woman near the front shifted uncomfortably. A man 2 rows back lowered his eyes. Clarence went on. This isn't about punishing the community. It's about respect. About reminding folks that access is not the same as ownership, and courtesy is not the same as weakness. He stepped back. Not dramatic. Not triumphant, just finished. A long pause followed. No clapping, no outbursts, just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. They weren't angry anymore. They were listening. Teresa sat stiff in the front row, arms crossed so tightly they looked like they might snap. But her face, once full of righteous certainty, had changed. Not entirely, not enough to admit fault. But the cracks were there. The kind that form when a truth you can't argue with sits too long in the room. After Clarence spoke, she didn't raise her hand, didn't ask questions. Just sat there, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. Ron Castile stood and cleared his throat. We're going to open the floor for discussion. Please keep things respectful. A man in a fishing hat, maybe in his 60s, stood first. I don't care who owns what, he said. That lake is part of this neighborhood's life. My grandkids fish there every summer. Clarence met his eyes. Then maybe the neighborhood should care enough to respect the person who's kept it open. The man didn't argue, just nodded and sat down. Another voice, softer this time. A woman near the wall. Would you consider renewing the agreement, if the board handled maintenance and we had clearer guidelines? Clarence didn't answer right away. He felt the room holding its breath. I'll consider it, he said. But not until I know people understand this isn't about rules on a page. It's about people, and the way we treat each other. That hit harder than anything else. After the meeting, a few lingered to thank him. Quiet words, short nods. One teenager even walked up, fidgeting with his sleeves. "Sir," my dad said, "you're the one who fixed the dock. I just wanted to say thanks." Clarence smiled, soft and tired. "Just take care of it." The next day, Andrea called. "We've started drafting a new agreement," she said. "One with scheduled maintenance, designated cleanup days, and a committee to manage oversight. And one more thing." "What's that?" "Before anyone gets access, they have to complete a short orientation. Nothing big, just a reminder of the lake's history, of who owns it, of what it represents." Clarence was quiet on the other end. "No more assumptions," Andrea added. "No more clipboards. No more threats." Across town, Teresa had resigned. Official reason, personal matters. Unofficially, everyone knew. She hadn't been fired. No one had shouted her down. She had simply been forced to see herself in a light she couldn't bear to stand under. Clarence didn't gloat. Didn't bring it up. Power wasn't about payback. It was about choosing not to use it when you could. And this new agreement, wasn't just about rules. It was about resetting the tone. About protecting what mattered without needing to raise your voice. A different kind of power. The kind that stands still, waits, and lets the truth do the talking. The morning was cool again. The kind of cool that hinted at fall but hadn't fully let go of summer. Clarence stood at the edge of Mayfield Lake with nothing in his hands. No rod, no tackle box. Just a folded piece of paper tucked under one arm. The new agreement, finalized and clean, with every name in the right place. He didn't come to fish. He didn't come to check the fences or the trash bins, or the benches he'd already fixed. He came for the silence. And the silence welcomed him. The lake was still. A mirror. It held the shape of the sky like it had all those years ago, when his father first pressed a rod into his young hands and said, "You listen more when you stop trying to fill the air." Clarence had listened. Listened when they called him a trespasser. Listened when they whispered behind their screens. Listened when they told themselves the story that made them feel safe, that he didn't belong. But now, no one was saying that. The trailhead was empty. No voices echoed down the dock. And yet, in that stillness, Clarence heard more than noise ever allowed. He heard change. It hadn't come easy. It hadn't come with apologies, or handshakes, or community potlucks. It came plank by plank, quiet step by quiet step, not by demanding respect, but by embodying it. Behind him, someone approached, soft steps on gravel. Andrea. No clipboard, no folder this time, just a warm nod and a thermos in her hand. "Didn't expect anyone out here," she said. "Didn't come to be seen." She stood beside him for a long while, both of them watching the wind ripple across the water. "They're reading the new agreement," she said, some grumbling, but no protests. Clarence nodded. "Good. They'll get used to it. They're starting to understand," Andrea said. "What this place means." Clarence didn't answer right away. He looked out across the lake and saw, not the trees or the water, but the memory of a boy sitting beside his father, bare feet swinging, rod in hand, no noise except the lapping of water, and the quiet feeling of being seen. "You don't protect something by yelling about it," he finally said. "You protect it by showing up, by standing still when it matters." Andrea didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Later, after she left, Clarence sat down on the rebuilt bench, Jasper at his feet, the paper still folded beside him, untouched. The air held no tension, just stillness. And that stillness spoke louder than anything he'd said at the meeting. It carried something deeper than victory. It carried the weight of a legacy reclaimed, not with anger, but with patience. Not by fighting noise, but by waiting long enough for the silence to speak back. You ever been underestimated, spoken over, dismissed, or told you didn't belong somewhere you knew was yours? If this story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. You don't have to yell to be heard. Sometimes, the quietest voice speaks the loudest truth. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to stand your ground with dignity? We'd love to hear your story.